Okay, so as I talked about earlier, here's the deal with the deficit. Yes, it's about 25 trillion. Excuse me, the debt deficit is the amount. Here, let's talk about debt and deficit for a second. The debt is the total amount that the U.S. government owes. So the debt that the U.S. government has is currently 25 trillion. A deficit is the difference in how much they spent and how much they took in a given year. So if the deficit in 1 year was 1 trillion, that means they spent a trillion more than they actually took in with tax revenue. Okay, so we've got that. And the thing about, so again, we talked about this. The thing is, 25 trillion is a huge. It sounds like a big amount of debt, right? Wow, that's a big number. 25 trillion. I can't count that. Here's the deal. That number in a vacuum means absolutely nothing. 25 trillion is a hell of a lot more than it was in 1930, right? The debt, but our economy is so much bigger than it was in 1930. So you can't look at that number in a vacuum. Yeah, it's a hell of a lot bigger than 1930, but would you rather be in the United States today with all the the innovations and how much bigger our economy is now than you versus 1930? So of course the debt is going to be higher because we're also making, there's more tax revenue. The economy is a lot bigger than it was in 1930, 1940, 1950. It's always getting bigger. So that number, a lot of people say 25 trillion. It sounds really big. That sounds really bad. If I had $25 trillion in debt, that would be you think of yourself, you're like, I'll never pay it off. Well, here's the deal. It only matters if it, think of it as on an individual basis. If you are making $100 a year, that's your salary, let's say, and you have debt of $200, that's an insane amount of debt. That's a lot of debt if you're only making $100 a year. But if you're making $1 million a year and your debt is, you have $100,000 worth of debt, well, it turns out that $100,000, it's a bigger number, but you'd much rather be in the millionaire's position because compared to how much revenue they have, compared to, and again, take this to the federal government, compared to how much bigger the economy is, the debt is actually not that much, it's not that big of a deal. So the other time, so the real metric you want to look at is the debt to GDP. The GDP is the value of, it's the measure of the economy. It's all goods and services sold in a given country, gross domestic product. Okay, so the last time the U.S. was in a serious debt, not crisis, but a debt issue, was post-World War II. The debt level reached 130% of GDP. So it was 130%. It was bigger than the Fukin economy generates in a year, which is a big level. So what happened? Well, the absolute debt since World War II actually increased. Yes, since World War II, yes, there's more debt, but our economy got so much bigger, so a percent of the GDP, it lowered. It went far down. So because, think of it, as you start making more money, your salary goes up, that debt becomes less and less of a big deal. Now, another thing, what's interesting, is where it becomes an issue is the U.S. government has to pay interest payments on this, right? So the Fukin, when you give debt, the U.S. sells treasuries. They have to pay interest rate on that debt. If the interest rate so I think it's at about $550 billion a year is what the U.S. pays in interest. They have to pay all, the private people, corporations, private individuals, corporations, and other governments that are holding their debt. They have to pay this much per year, $500 billion, something like that, per year, in order to keep in order to uphold their obligations. Now, here's the thing. That's a lot of money, but it's actually it's at about a similar percent of GDP as it was around World War II. So, or a little after. It's basically, as a percent of the economy, those interest payments, $500 billion, they were a lot less, Fukin 70 years ago, but our economy is so much bigger. So it's not that much of a burden to be paying that $500 billion in interest payments. Does this mean we don't need to care about the debt, and should we try to balance the budget? Yeah. This is an important issue, but I think people, when they see that number, 25 trillion, they think the world is falling. And listen, it'd be better if it was lower, sure, but I want to share some posts about what people thought about the debt in post World War II. So again, this is a post from Morgan Housel. He calls "Who Pays for This?" and he quotes a couple things here. He says this. He says, the budget deficit hit a record in 1943 at 30% of GDP. This year's deficit, around 19% of GDP, will be equivalent to the deficits run in 1944 and 1945, also during their peak war years. Federal debt as a percentage of GDP is on track to exceed its previous record set in 1946 next year. In 1944, University of Illinois economist named Frank Dixon said the only way to survive the U.S. Debt was defaulting its $200 billion in debt post-World War II, defaulting on its obligations. Otherwise, a whole generation would spend entire careers paying it off. Here's another excerpt from an Illinois newspaper, June 1944, a week after D-Day. By the time World War II broke out in Europe, in 1939, the New Deal had hiked our per capita debt to $308, and by the end of Pearl Harbor to $368. Today, it's about $1,486, and it's still climbing. Somehow we feel that these figures speak for themselves, so each reader is invited to make his own editorial comment. Of course, this was 1944, so they did not do the his or her thing, but here we go. So, in 1946, the Council of Economic Advisors delivered a report to President Truman warning of a full-scale depression sometime in the next 1 to 4 years caused by the amount of debt we had. Now, so Morgan Housel's whole point in this post, his point is that you'd never pay off the debt, you grow out of it. So if the economy gets so much bigger that the debt becomes a smaller percent compared to GDP, then that's how it becomes manageable. There's always going to be, the United States will always have debt. I think the last time we were debt free, it was paid off, I think in the 1800s, that we had zero debt. The thing is, it's also why the U.S. Can fund itself and raise so much debt. They can raise this debt at very low interest rates because people trust the United States, they trust the U.S. dollar. So people are willing to, not only corporations and individuals. A lot of people think, oh, China owns all our debt. Well, that's not true. I forgot the exact percent, but it's not. A lot of corporations own U.S. debt. A lot of people like me and you own debt. If you have like a bond account with treasuries in it, you own U.S. debt. So it's just an interesting thing to put in perspective. Okay. Barlow, hit me with those questions. If we got any questions, comments, hit me on that G-chat, Habibi, and we'll be ready for those. If we got any, if not, I want to talk about a couple more things here. So here I'm going to close with this. Okay. So what does it all mean that we need to grow out of this debt? Well, here's what it means. It means that the only way, and Mark Andreessen said this in an interview. Okay, so hold on. So we're going to get to this closing thought, but we were getting some questions from Charlie. I'm going to address these from Nice Things. Okay, epic. Thank you, Matt Buckley, for weighing in here. Okay, he said, what are your predictions for the next 4 weeks? Earnings reports, fallout, looming protests against lockdowns, which could have the effect of prolonging the need for the lockdowns, etc. Okay, so predictions. I love it. You want to make me put. Here's the deal. Earnings reports. I'll say this. Do I think, even despite the Fed's actions, I think, and we talked about this last week, Howard Marks said, what happens in all-time market lows is that market low is retested within 3 months. So I forgot what the market low with the S&P 500, the collection of the biggest 500 companies in the United States, what that low has been, but we're I think 30% or something higher than that previous low. But he said a lot of the times in these bear markets is it's retested within 3 months. So I think I mean, who knows? I will preface this with all who knows. That's why I don't buy individual stocks except just a few. I just buy the market and just fall asleep and wake up in 40 years and that'll be my retirement. Here's the thing. We don't fucking know what's gonna happen. But I think my gut says it's probably gonna get retested. It's kind of blowing my mind, even despite the Fed's actions, how much everything's come back. And to your point about when these earnings reports start to come out, and we're actually seeing these public companies are releasing the data on what their sales are. I think we're probably we're not out of this. We're not out of this. I think there's gonna be some more bumpy roads ahead. And you touched on another thing. You said the looming protests. Well, there aren't looming protests. There are protests. There was protests in North Carolina. There are protests in Michigan. I think that was I don't know where it was, but there's a big protest in Michigan. I think this is something that's absolutely going to continue and only heat up as people want to get back to work. And because it's not a good thing to keep no one's going to say it's a good thing to keep this lockdown going. What it is it a necessary thing? Yes. But the thing is, I think it's very easy, and we talked about this earlier. It's very easy to say, we got to keep it locked down. If you can do your job as a white collar worker, you can do your job remotely, and it's not that big of an impact for you. I mean, it's still a big impact, but it's not that big of an impact compared to someone that fucking needs to get back to work. I do think it's a worth it discussion to have. Now, does that mean people need to be protesting right now? I'm not saying that. What I am saying though is that it's not as if, oh no one should even question the fact that the government is encouraging people not to go outside and always wear a mask and things like that. So I think it's a very we talked about this in any major any major thing that goes down, right? The U.S. government expands. Take 9/11 for example. The U.S. government that was with the Patriot Act and with the Snowden leaks, we saw the U.S. government, the security, the spy apparatus exploded exponentially because of that. And it was an absolute infringement on our civil liberties, full stop, 100%. And now I'm not saying that's what's going on here. I am saying this discussion it's a worth it discussion to have. If people are used to just getting getting shut down, is it something that the government will turn to more quickly in the future? And North Carolina had interesting. Their official police, I think it was the Durham police account that said the people were protesting the lockdown, right? And it said protesting is a non-essential activity, which I just thought was hilarious. Well, the fucking Constitution, the First Amendment says it is. That's literally what our country's founded on. So, again, should people be fucking protesting and potentially being close to you guys? No, I don't think they should be doing that. But I think it's very easy to call these people kooks. And I'm not out there protesting. I'm a big fan of protests. I think it's integral to a democratic society, but I'm not out there protesting because I think right now the calculus, it makes sense. Because there's so many unknowns, it makes sense to be on the cautious side. And Dr. Chris Nash that came on here said the same thing. It's possible we open this thing up and it's actually a bigger hit to the economy because we have unknowns and it could wreak hell of a lot more havoc. So we don't know. But maybe what's going to be the situation where in 4 weeks we know a little bit more and we're pretty sure we're good. This is going to be a very difficult ongoing conversation to have and a worth it conversation to have. Again, it's not a matter of absolute lockdown or complete open. There's going to be a range there, and it's going to be important. It's going to be an important discussion as we go through these next few weeks, and we're going to be riffing on it. Okay, so here's what I want to end with. And we talked about the only way that the federal government can make this debt issue not a major deal is to grow out of it. Oh, whoops, I still got the fucking, I love that. I still got this, chart up. Okay, I'm taking that chart off. Okay, so here's the thing. The only way that the U.S., this debt that the federal government has, which I think it's going to be, what are the numbers? I didn't say these at the beginning, but there's going to be a $3.1 trillion, 3.8, oh, this was an estimate by the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, $3.8 trillion deficit this year and a $2.1 trillion dollar deficit next year in 2021. So this is a nonpartisan entity making these predictions. They seem to be pretty reliable. The thing is, so the only way that that the U.S. government will will not default on its debt and it will not wreck the economy with how much debt we have is to make the economy bigger. So Mark Andreessen, and this is what I was getting to earlier, and I appreciate Buckley, I appreciate you chiming in here. This is what I was talking about. Mark Andreessen said, if the economy doesn't grow, it quickly becomes a zero-sum game in that whatever person A takes is less person B gets or person C or person D. So the only way to ensure that the pie is bigger is to make the economy bigger. And then, so rather than we're not fighting over or rather a limited set of resources. If the total pie is bigger, now we can talk about, and we'll have a discussion another time about what is fair about how to divvy up that pie. But the only way that we're going to get through this, the only way that we're going to come out of this and the U.S. government will remain stable is if the economy gets bigger. Because if the economy gets bigger, that debt to GDP ratio will fall down, and then it will be okay. So don't be afraid of that $25 trillion number. We're gonna cue up this little outro music for a little bit here. The only way that pie is going to get bigger is if the economy does better, if people keep innovating, if humans keep doing what they're best at, keep creating new companies, new ideas, new products, allocating capital in a better way. That's what's going to grow the pie, and that's what's going to make this debt not a big deal. And we're going to be talking about these questions. These are ongoing questions.